What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of 30 in 30, and today we're going to talk about overtraining. Now, just because you train arms for 50 sets in a workout, that doesn't mean that you're overtraining. While that may not be the smartest thing to do, I'm going to define overtraining, and it actually has nothing to do with specifically training a body part for a certain amount of reps or sets. So let's get into what scientists define as overtraining, which might surprise you. Overtraining, and I have my notes here so I get it right, is a physiological state caused by an excess accumulation of physiological, psychological, emotional, environmental, and chemical stress that leads to a sustained decrease in physical and mental performance that requires a relatively long period of time to recover. So what are the big things there? The first one is physiological. Now, we're not talking about doing 50 plus sets in a given workout. What we're referring to here is more or less like burnout or like an illness or kind of like a hangover. So it's not because of overtraining. I think a lot of people hear the word overtraining and they automatically think that it involves directly training. There's a whole lot more going on than just the physical training aspect. And the physical training aspect, yes, does have some influence, but it's not the only factor in determining whether you are truly, in fact, overtraining. The second thing in there is excess accumulation of stress. So yes, that could be from a training session, but that also there's a lot of other things going on in our lives other than just our given gym sessions. So we have, just for example, myself, we have, bills to pay. I have a mortgage. I have a wife. We have a dog that we have to take care of. We have family. Like, these are all things that could add stress to us, both in a positive and negative way. But if, for example, if an illness came along, in my family or myself, like, that would have a negative stress on me, and that might contribute to potentially overtraining. The next one is a sustained decrease in mental performance. And the key thing there is sustained. When people go into the gym and they might have one or two off training sessions, they think, oh man, I must be overtraining. Well, there could be some other outside factors going on, like I just mentioned, that might lead to them having a poor workout, and it's not necessarily overtraining. The last one is overloading the nervous system or immune system or your hormonal system. So when that happens, like for example, I ran a a powerlifting program years and years and years ago, and I do think that I might have been reaching overtraining towards the end, and I actually stopped it before it got any worse. But I was overloading my nervous system because I was essentially training at very, very high weights for overall maxes at low reps, and I was having to train to the nerve, as some people call it, when you have to like overhype yourself, overstimulate yourself in order to accomplish a lift. So getting back to what is overtraining and what is not overtraining. So overtraining, what it could potentially be is, yes, maybe overexerting yourself a little bit too much into the gym, but then all these other life factors going on, outside of the gym that causes stress to build up, that causes your performance to go down over time, that causes your recovery to hinder. So we all have different rates that we can recover at. And this is where I wanted to get into a little bit more detail, and this is where I think a lot of people drop the ball with their training and why people might think they are overtraining. But first, I did want to say this, that probably not a lot of us are overtraining. When we look at the given week, even if we are training 7 days a week for 2 hours a day, let's do some simple math there. That's not a lot. That's 14 hours of training in a given week, and we have all the other time to rest. And even if we are pushing it for 3 hours in a given workout, which not a lot of us train for 3 hours because we can't perform for 3 hours at a high level, that would still only be 21 hours of work in a given week where we're lifting weights, which is, in the grand scheme of things, not a ton of time. So I think a lot of us are not overtraining. What I do think a lot of us are doing is not allowing our bodies enough time to properly recover because we are forcing the workouts. Now I know that some people, and this is, I've been guilty of this in the past as well, some people force workout upon themselves because it falls into their schedule. What we have to do is realize that a body part is not necessarily ready to be trained if it is still sore. And yes, there are different levels of soreness, but if we are fatigued, if like your legs are still fatigued and you train them on Monday and Wednesday rolls around and you're scheduled to train legs again, but they're still really sore, you probably shouldn't do that, which will lead, it's just poor fatigue management is what people are most likely doing, and not necessarily overtraining. It's just they don't manage their fatigue well. So instead of training on Wednesday, you should move it to Thursday or Friday, and that would be a lot more beneficial for people who are trying to schedule their workouts, more appropriately. So that's how you would avoid overtraining in that matter. Another thing that we want to focus on is obviously, our recovery and our sleep in general. Make sure we are, taking the supplements that we need, making sure we are getting in our food, because that, along with quality rest, is going to help us the most when we're trying to recover from our workouts, which will hinder overtraining. Another huge factor is going to be decreasing our total stress levels. Yes, we can take some anti-cortisol products that are out there, but the biggest thing is to try to reduce any outside stressors. Now, yes, some of us have more outside stress than others, but there are ways, to combat stress in these kind of situations. So manage stress as much as possible, and that should help you not overtrain. Why I want to say that not a lot of us are probably overtraining is because I simply don't think a lot of us, train hard enough to overtrain ourselves and long enough. Yes, there are some people at a high level that may be running themselves into the ground, but I sincerely doubt that a lot of people are overtraining, because remember what I said, it's a sustained decrease over time in performance. And I feel like a lot of us, myself included, we have really good workouts and then we have a few crappy workouts. We have a few good workouts and then maybe one crappy workout. And it happens, some of us more frequently than others, but we're talking about a definite decline over time of our performance, which is probably a sign of overtraining. Some other signs of overtraining, and this is a very familiar thing in the bodybuilding scene, is like flat muscles, just overall, achiness for days on end, problems with sleep, problems with, your sex drive, stuff like that. Are signs of overtraining. What can lead to overtraining, I mentioned powerlifting earlier with myself, is if you're training at super high weight with higher reps. Let's say if you're going for almost an all-out max all the time, if you're training to failure all the time with high weights, and even if you're doing hypertrophy exercises but to failure, multiple sets to failure, if you're training to failure all the time, that may lead to overtraining. But it's not, I'm not saying if you take a couple sets to failure in a given sessions or even throughout the week that you're going to lead to overtraining. I'm talking about if you're training to failure all the time for every single set, every single exercise, that may lead to overtraining. But once again, we do have to manage our frequency, manage our exercises a little bit smarter. I talked about in other videos looking at our total volume for a given week. But the biggest thing here is that I want you guys to walk away from today is just make sure that we are getting our stress levels down for these, if we can, over these individual training sessions over the weeks, because that is going to help with our overall performance. And then two is just making sure that we're training smart. And I wish I wouldn't have to talk about training smart, because I feel like a lot of the people that are in the bodybuilding community train at a high level, or I would assume they train at a high level. But yeah, if we're taking if we're training a body part 2 or 3 or even 4 times a week and we're not allowing it to recover, that can lead to an overtraining of a body part. I do want to close with this though and say that don't be afraid to push the limits of our frequency and of our volume though, because I feel like some people may think that, the magic number, is 25 to 30 sets that I can perform in a given session, and if I do a 31st set, that's going to be considered overtraining. Well, as I said before, we do have different rates of recovery, and although that is a general guideline to have, don't be afraid to try to increase that slowly over time, because I think a lot of people are afraid of overtraining. Like I said, I feel like a lot of us are not overtraining because we just don't work long enough in a given week to run our bodies into the ground. Granted, if there's extracurricular circumstances going on, we might be more susceptible to that, but what I would say is just monitor your total volume and don't be afraid of potentially overtraining. So thanks for tuning in, guys. Tune in tomorrow for another episode of 30 in 30. I'll see you then.